Alright, I'm back with another Destiny 2 video, and this time I wanted to talk about a theory I've had for a little while now, pretty much ever since we saw the reveal of the Witch Queen and where its destination would be, which is Savathun's throne world. This proved everybody wrong who thought we were going to Old Chicago, myself included. This is a different location where we are in kind of Savathun's self-created realm here, where she's able to give her hive the lights, and there is a raid that takes place inside a ruined pyramid. There's a fortress, there's swamps, there's a whole lot of things. But it did seem kind of like we were really moving in the direction of Old Chicago. There was a very large number of hints that this was potentially the plan all the way back in Season of the Hunt. A lot of lore in Season of the Hunt was telling kind of this elaborate story of kind of stalking some sort of creature around Old Chicago. And usually when Bungie brings up an area a couple of times, they are hinting at it in the future. That is the first time Old Chicago has really been brought up in Destiny since the Graviton Lance lore, so to see that kind of come up out of nowhere, that did seem like it could be sort of a tease for Old Chicago. It just, the whole sense of Old Chicago kind of made sense. In the lore, Old Chicago is a very ruined area that has sort of just devolved into a swampy mess. Given that it's close to the coast and there's rivers and stuff, you can see how that might have been the case. And so we thought we were going to get kind of like a swamp environment, which would kind of vibe with the whole Savathun green mist evil thing, with the confusing part being like, why would Savathun be hanging out in Old Chicago? That's kind of weird. But I have a theory about what happened here is that originally, I don't know how long ago, but a while back, because these expansions are in the works for a year, 2 years, however long it takes. A while back, Bungie kind of resurfaced one of their old concepts for this expansion, and that was Old Chicago. This happened with Europa. There was Europa concept art from years ago from Destiny 1, and eventually they're like, all right, screw it, yeah, let's do Europa. And so the version of Europa that we got for Beyond Light was very similar to that concept art, right down to the frozen cities and things like that, and they just kind of, used something that they were planning to do at a long time in the past. Old Chicago also has its own concept art from Destiny 1 around the same period of time. Kind of a swampy, ruined zone like I was talking about, giant skyscrapers in the background and stuff. So it stood to reason that kind of all these clues were leading us to believe that Old Chicago was coming. So instead we have a throne world, and yet what we've seen at the throne world makes me believe that the original plan probably was to do Old Chicago at some point. There is enough imagery from this where it is really easy to kind of see how at one point the swamps of Old Chicago theme is very much present in the zone. There are a large number of screenshots and things that are just clearly swamps. Like, this is a swamp infested area for at least some part of it. We don't know how big the map is, but some portion of it will indeed be a swamp area. And that is either taken kind of almost directly from the concept art or from the idea that, like, perhaps we really were going to go to Old Chicago at some point, and then during, the course of development, something changed where they're like, okay, let's make this Savathun's throne world. So why would they change from Old Chicago to Savathun's throne world? And why is this probably the right call? Like, this seems like probably the better decision in the end, given the freedom that it offers them in terms of the story. The main problem with Old Chicago is kind of what I said earlier, where it's like, why would Savathun be there? I mean, it's science fiction. You can kind of make up whatever you want to a certain extent of like, oh, the lost, buried so-and-so artifact that Savathun wants to remove her worm or whatever is in Old Chicago, and there's, that could be the reason there. That said, there are still kind of limits to what you can do in a zone like that you have specifically set on Earth. And in that sense, like, what we see now from Savathun's throne world is the three major pieces that have been revealed are the swampy area, which directly reminds me of Old Chicago, just minus kind of buildings and skyscrapers. The ruined pyramid for the raid, which is kind of in the background, and yet we know we are actually going there. And then Savathun's giant castle palace thing, which is a bit like the Red Keep, except it's like white, and it is a little prettier, I guess. It's kind of like a Leviathan vibe meets Hive aesthetic. And it's pretty easy now to see how two of those three things would not have made any real sense for Old Chicago. We just discovered the first pyramid, in our solar system in Shadowkeep 2 years ago that was buried under the moon. If there was just a giant ruined pyramid sitting around Old Chicago, that would have kind of thrown a wrench into things. Or if we discovered a second buried pyramid under Chicago, that would be a little samey, I guess, to what we saw in Shadowkeep, even if it kept it off the surface and allowed an explanation for that. Savathun setting up this giant sprawling castle in Old Chicago would also seem like a little bit of a stretch, and something that we would have noticed. And then finally, the lore reason here, we're still kind of debating what this means, but the fact that this is Savathun's throne world, kind of this dimensional space that she has created through Hive sword logic and blah, 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 this is a place where her Hive can get the light. And we don't know if the current setup of the plotline where Savathun gives her Hive the light is something that is just contained to her throne world, and that it's possible because this is her throne world and sort of like her own fantasy idealized, version of how she wants things to be, or if Hive can actually use the light elsewhere outside of her throne world. But if it was in Old Chicago, that would be a very kind of clear and present problem. Like, okay, why can only these Hive use it, where these other ones can't, and all these other zones, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that the decision was made at some point to kind of keep some of the vibe and the aesthetic of Old Chicago, the swampy areas, I'm sure the kind of overall tension and horror elements that that expansion will provide would be similar to what we would have gotten if we'd stuck with Old Chicago. And yet, I think changing this to Savathun's throne world really opened up possibilities to add in a lot more kind of wild content, whether it's the raid or castle or Hive getting the light, all these different things, in a way that Old Chicago, trying to explain why all this stuff would have been hidden away in Old Chicago and we just never saw it before, would be a little weird. And I can also see personally how Old Chicago may have felt a little too similar to the EDZ. Both are kind of green, lush, overgrown earth areas. I almost made a video today on the case for EDZ being sunset over Forsaken content. I will probably do that later, because that's not going to be irrelevant anytime soon, because we still have to deal with that issue. But I still think it's happening, but it's kind of, you can see how removing the EDZ and putting in Old Chicago may have been a little too similar if there were not those extra fantastical elements like we see that we're getting in Savathun's throne world. So this is not the most groundbreaking theory on Earth, I suppose, and plans change, and it is, I think this is ultimately for the better, and that the throne world gives us a lot more freedom here. But in terms of people asking where did Old Chicago go? Why are we not going there? I think this is the reason why. I think Old Chicago would have been too limiting, and the decision was made to instead kind of use that aesthetic while converting the concept into Savathun's throne world. I think this will be great. I'm really looking forward to it, but I would not expect Old Chicago itself to ever enter the game after this, because it would just be too similar, I think, in a lot of ways to what we're seeing here. It may come up in the lore again, things like that. If they wanted to use the swamp elements from the Witch Queen and set some random, presage type standalone mission in Old Chicago or whatever, that would be kind of cool. I don't know if they'll ever actually do that, but who knows. So anyways, that's kind of my thoughts on this whole thing and how we got where we are now and why we are not going to see Old Chicago, even though we're getting that kind of vibe from the throne world to a certain extent. So anyway, that's my thoughts. You can let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and I will talk to you guys later. Take care.